The Gloucester Javelin was one of the first jets in War Thunder to get air-to-air missiles, and it flies for Great Britain. Let's check it out. The Gloucester Javelin was the result of a design competition started in 1949 by the British Ministry of Supply in order to produce a new high-speed interceptor. It's important to keep in mind that jet aircraft design was still in its infancy back then, and while the Javelin may look unusual to modern eyes, this was a cutting-edge design back in the day. Its large delta wing, fuselage-mounted engines, and high-mounted T-tail were a radical departure from previous twin-engine jet designs, which up to that point had tended to favor placing the engines in pods out in or under the wings. The first prototype of the Javelin flew in 1951, but the early development was plagued with design flaws. There were problems with production quality, and the unfortunate deaths of several highly experienced test pilots during the initial evaluations. The plane entered service in 1956 and immediately began to show some performance shortcomings with the early models, which motivated a series of successive upgrades to the basic design. Improvements introduced during the 1950s included upgraded engines, multiple radar systems on different models, and some aerodynamic refinements, along with hydraulic controls, afterburners for the upgraded engines, and, importantly, the ability to carry the Firestreak air-to-air missile. This presented a significant upgrade in terms of overall combat utility, and combined with the plane's radar, made the Javelin a fairly capable aircraft in the interceptor role it was originally designed for. The final upgrade package for the Javelin was the FAW Mk.9 version, which has an all-weather fighter interceptor capability and introduced new afterburning engines, a slightly redesigned wing, and upgrades to the weapons system. It served with the Royal Air Force until 1968 and ended up participating in a few operational deployments, but in the end, the Gloucester Javelin never saw combat. What we're looking at in War Thunder is the Javelin FAW Mk.9, which is in Rank 6 at Battle Rating 8.3. This was one of the first aircraft in the game equipped with air-to-air missiles, and it's still one of the lowest battle rating missile-armed fighters. The weapon system of the Javelin includes a dual radar set, containing the APS-21 search radar and the APG-26 tracking radar. This provides the Javelin with the ability to continue scanning, even with a target locked up. Now, the dual-mode radar set also gives you the radar C-scope, in addition to the usual PPI, along with 2 different angle presets and a few range settings for the scope. Now, the weapon loadouts for the Javelin ask you to decide on a mix of wing-mounted internal Aiden cannons and the Firestreak missile. You can go with a 2 to 4 combo of either weapon, depending on your playstyle. It's worth noting that being mounted so far out on the wings, aiming the cannons can be a bit tricky, and you'll want to experiment a bit with gun convergence angles to find a setting that works well for you. That's a topic I actually have a video tutorial for, and I'll link it at the end of this review. The good news is that the 30mm Aiden cannons hit very hard, and even glancing hits can cause pretty heavy damage. The Firestreak missile itself is an interesting weapon. This is the first infrared-guided missile in the game that you can get that has an uncaged seeker, which makes using it significantly easier than other early weapons like the AIM-9B or the R3S. However, its overall performance is still very much entry-level. It only has 15 Gs of pull, limited range, and a max launch load of 4 Gs. This means that you won't be able to fire the missile if the Javelin is pulling more than 4 Gs in a turn. The effective range in most situations is about 2.5 kilometers, but even at shorter ranges, it's pretty easy to dodge, as you'll notice in a few of the clips in this review. The Javelin's flight performance is excellent for a plane in its tier. The afterburning engines give it very strong acceleration at low to medium speeds, and combined with the Javelin's enormous wings, this plane can achieve some really impressive climb rates. Intercepting bombers in RB is almost trivial with the Javelin, even taking off from the runway, and you can use this plane as a high-altitude vulture very effectively. The maneuverability is pretty good most of the time. The Javelin tends to bleed off speed quite fast in turns, and opponents will often try to suck you into a prolonged turning fight. The key is to carefully manage your afterburner to maintain your own speed while not overshooting any of your opponents in maneuvers. This can be more art than science, and it takes a little practice, especially since the Javelin can get tiered into fighting jets with much weaker engines, but better energy retention. Another thing that you'll notice with the Javelin is that this plane loves to rip its wings off. I strongly suggest unequipping the hydraulic boosters, as this will help prevent wing rips in combat, and frankly, the Javelin doesn't experience control compression as badly as some other jets, so you don't really need the boosters anyway. Also, you need to watch your speed. The Javelin can fly itself apart in level flight, so when you start to get those reduced speed warnings, pay attention. The good news is, the plane has an air brake, so just don't forget to use it, especially if you're diving in on someone from higher altitude. Something else to remember, the Javelin is strictly subsonic, so don't try to push it past Mach 1 in a dive or anything. Flying the Javelin out in missions today is quite a different experience from when the plane was first introduced to the game back in 2018. The impressive engine performance and rate of climb give you some really solid flexibility in deciding if you want to climb up to potentially intercept bombers or something, or if you want to fight down at the lower altitudes. The Javelin ends up being a very effective aircraft if you fly it up and use its radar to search for targets, and occasionally dive down on targets of opportunity below you when given the chance. While the radar isn't especially powerful, it's powerful enough at this BR, and it absolutely can help find targets that are like trying to drag out a match and run down the clock, or bombers that are trying to side climb up into space. Now, combined with the Firestreak missile, the potential of the Javelin to fly those kind of interceptions should absolutely not be overlooked. Flying out into more traditional dogfighting is possible, but it does present some challenges and caveats. The Javelin can be pretty maneuverable in a fight, but as mentioned before, it dumps off speed very quickly, and you have to get good at managing your throttle and walking that tightrope of keeping your speed up, maintaining turn rate, and staying behind your target without overshooting. Using the Javelin as a close-in fighter does take some practice, so don't get frustrated if your first experiences with it are pretty rough. Also keep in mind, this plane is enormous. The Javelin's wing is huge. In fact, it's larger than basically any other fighter in the game, and unfortunately, it isn't especially tough. So even mild battle damage will be enough to take down the Javelin. You can dogfight with it, just don't get hit at all, even by low caliber shots. Visually, the Javelin is a unique looking aircraft. It's absolutely enormous, and if you haven't seen it in the game before up close, you're going to be surprised when you fly it out for the first time and see it sitting on the runway next to F-84s or Mk.9s. You don't get any custom paint jobs for it, but you can find a few community skins that look okay. Landing the Javelin isn't difficult at all, so long as you remember to use the air brake, and that the plane has very short landing gear. Or at least it feels like it does, because the plane itself is so huge. Just practice a couple of times in a test flight, and you really shouldn't have any trouble. The cockpit of the Javelin is a little bit of a mixed bag. The visibility is excellent, and I had no problem with situational awareness flying out in VR, but I really don't like the layout of the instrumentation. I found myself checking War Thunder's top left OSD a lot more than I wanted to, because the instruments in the cockpit are just tiny and really difficult to find in a pinch. To close out on the Gloucester Javelin FAW Mk.9. This plane has a good radar set for its BR, and it can carry the Firestreak air-to-air missile, which again is a very powerful weapon at this BR. Plus, it has afterburning engines, which give it great acceleration and a strong rate of climb. However, it has a very low maximum speed. It can rip its wings off in level flight, and it's a huge target in air combat. The final verdict on the Javelin is that this plane provides a very unique gameplay experience at BR 8.3, and with a little practice, it can be relatively good even in the current meta. The Javelin is particularly strong as an interceptor, but it can take patience to use it effectively. As always, thanks for watching.